Another episode of covering some SEC football as number 8 LSU travels to Kyle Field to take on number 14 Texas A&M. Now, this is a matchup that I've been itching to talk about for a number of reasons. I mean, for the most part, talked about LSU handful of times on this program. I mean, previewed a couple weeks ago the Old Miss matchup 2 weeks ago. Also talked about LSU and USC earlier as well. And you know, this game is definitely exciting for a number of different reasons. I mean, who would have thought that LSU and Texas A&M would be on top of the SEC right now, with both of them boating a pretty solid win streak. I mean, LSU has won 6 in a row, while Texas A&M also brings a 6 game win streak as well. So both teams who are playing really good defense, who are playing pretty solid defensively, and aren't making too many mistakes, and you know kind of trying to piece everything together. When you look at this full picture, I mean, obviously LSU lost to USC at the beginning of the year, while A&M lost to Notre Dame. And as I was thinking about this too, a lot of those two losses at the beginning of the year are pretty much you know out of people's minds for the most part. I mean, it took me a second to even remember the A&M and Notre Dame game too much, because of how impressive Texas A&M has been this season under first year head coach Mike Elko, who came from Duke. And more power to him as well, because he definitely deserves a lot of credit for the transformation that A&M has done. I think, granted, obviously the big buyout with Jimbo, there's going to be expectations that are going to be you know immediate turnaround time, just given how much you know A&M has invested in the football program in general. But right now, the investments are getting the benefits of them right now. I mean, even when Connor Wegman went down, Marcel Reed deserves a hell of a lot of credit for being able to lead this offense and really being able to double down on the rushing attack and continue to get that going too. Because as Connor Wegman is now back in the starting lineup, one of the questions I asked myself in terms of A&M's offense was how different would it look? Would A&M be shifting more towards the sort of air raid kind of style that they had back in the day under Kevin Sumlin and Johnny Manziel, or was it going to be more of the kind of the you know pro style sort of element where you're really kind of relying on the run, and letting Le'Veon Moss kind of be the workhorse of this A&M offense. And with that said, I mean, I can't say at the moment that I can really pick a winner in this one, because I because the argument can be made for either or. And I'm going to be breaking down in a few moments in terms of what I think the keys to success are for LSU and Texas A&M in this matchup. But just kind of set the stage in terms of what this game means for both programs. I mean, in terms of LSU, I mean, you have to ask yourself. Brian Kelly has been a hell of a head football coach for a number of years. You know, starting off at Cincinnati, making his way to Notre Dame, and even publicly saying regarding taking the LSU job, "Hey, I came here to win a national championship, and I'm not going to expect anything less." And LSU is last time they won a national championship was 2020 under Joe Burrow, so it's possible that they can get there. And you kind of ask yourself, you're Brian Kelly, how many more times are you going to be in a situation where you see clear vulnerabilities, and really all of the top SC programs. I mean, when you think about Ole Miss, I mean, yes, the offense has been explosive, but when the defense needs to make a stop, it just simply hasn't been there. When you talk about Alabama, you say to yourself, okay, Jalen Milrow has been sloppy in the red zone, and Alabama secondary has given way too many big explosive plays. As for Georgia, I mean, the offense simply hasn't quite came together as much, and I previewed this, talking last week too. However, they played a pretty solid game versus Texas, all things considered, so give them some credit there. And then with Texas, Quinn Ewers just got benched for Arch Manning for one quarter and then ultimately came back in. But if you're watching some Texas film and you got them coming on the radar, you know, you might maybe smell a little blood in the water. I mean, it's not completely far fetched to sit there and say, you know what, Texas still definitely a top five country team in the country still. But at the same time, you have to ask yourself, who really is the favorite in college football now? And going into this game, I'll make the declaration right now that whoever wins this game will be in the college football playoff, whether that means they're in the SEC championship game or get one of the outstanding bids. I think that's still in fruition right now. It's still kind of developing, but nevertheless, if you're LSU or A&M and you get a really big win here, it'll definitely lead things in the right direction here. I mean, we'll talk about LSU first in terms of their keys of the game. I mean, so far this year they've beat Nickel State, South Carolina, UCLA, South Alabama, Ole Miss, and Arkansas. And I've talked about this team a little bit a couple weeks ago, so I'm sure most people who have watched the episode are going to understand where I'm coming from in terms of this next segment. But in terms of if you're LSU, I mean, what they have going for them right now is, for the most part, they've been playing, you know, a pretty well balanced attack to the point where they're getting Caden Durham involved just enough to the point where he is a legitimate threat. The offensive line has done a really excellent job at protecting Nussmeier, only giving up 2 sacks this season. And also secondarily, when he's getting enough time, he's able to make those reads and make those progressions and open up the explosive plays a little bit. I mean, if you saw last week when they were in Fayetteville, they had just enough there for those plays to be open. And if you're Texas A&M, that's definitely something you have to keep your eyes on in terms of that Texas A&M secondary. I would not be surprised to see LSU maybe take a couple shots, see if you catch them sleeping a little bit. And one of the things you have to ask yourself too, and I think this generally in terms of both teams, but a lot of people will kind of push back in terms of this being more of a sort of Nussmeier versus Wegman matchup. However, I really don't see it that way at all. I see this matchup being, yes, we talk about the trenches all the time in terms of SEC football, offensive line, defensive line, who wins that trench battle. But for me, what I'm really looking for in this matchup is who has the better rushing attack. I think fundamentally speaking, that's really going to be determining who wins this game. And the reason why I say that is because when LSU has been able to run the ball, which Caden Durham has posted two 100-yard games in the past 3 weeks, you have to ask yourself, you know, if LSU can get this rushing attack going, it could be a long day for A&M. And A&M has honestly played a really solid season in terms of being on defense, and they really have a good defensive front. And if LSU can find their way to, you know, spread the field a little bit, get Durham, going early, this could be one of those situations where Kyle Field might be, turning real quick in terms of, you know, letting that, not having that energy anymore, and not having that 12th man energy to the point where it could significantly impact the game. And then, vice versa, if you're thinking about it from a Texas A&M perspective, you you have Le'Veon Moss, who I've talked about before. He's clearly the workhorse of this team, and you also have Amari Daniels too, who's been a good complimentary back for this program. And when Marcel Reed was quarterback, they really did double down on this rushing attack. And if they can do anything like they did versus Mizzou and particularly Florida as well, it could be a long day out there for LSU. So that's why I think it's so important that this game really does come down to that one of the key elements of this game is who has the better running attack. Because I think there is some valid criticisms in terms of Connor Wegman. I mean, do I think he's definitely a better option than Marcel Reed? Absolutely. Is the athleticism there? Yes, it's clearly there. The kid has a good arm. He struggled a little bit kind of getting onto the field, being able to find a rhythm. The receivers, haven't always been there when he needed them, but at the same time too, it's one of those things where it's clear as day that the main the main storyline of this game is going to be, you know, who can who can who can run better, because LSU's defense did give up three turn did cause three turnovers against Arkansas, and Arkansas in that game was essentially one dimensional, where Taylor Green wasn't able to extend plays, wasn't able to get outside the pocket, and ultimately were able to contain him just enough to be able to cause pressure, and LSU was able to run away with the game. So essentially, that's one of the many reasons why I think the rushing attack is a lot more prevalent. Going to be a lot more prevalent in terms of the result of this matchup. Even though it is fair to say, hey, maybe it's going to be all about Nussmeier, but I don't exactly see it that way. And then, I expanded on this too a little bit in terms of LSU, but I think the other thing you have to ask yourself too is how are they going to stretch the field? I talked about Nussmeier being able to get some explosive plays a couple weeks ago, but I think you have to do the same thing in the rushing attack too. I mean, can you get Texas A&M spread out enough to I'd love to see some play action, getting some comeback routes, some crawl routes, you know, for example, I love the play that they ran versus Ole Miss, where Nussmeier was able to put it right in the breadbasket there and win the game. Can we see some more examples of, Brian Kelly and the LSU offense to really kind of double down and trust that, and trust that, get the really quick start, and ultimately keep Texas A&M a little bit honest too, because yes, he's only threw for two. Nussmeier only threw for 233 yards last week, but at the same time too, he's in many ways has shown that he can do enough to lead his team to a win. And now that I'm kind of shifting from the LSU talking points, I'm going to talk about now what I think Texas A&M has to do in order to win this game. I mean, aside from the rushing attack, I expanded upon that on both sides of the football. But if you're A&M, one of the things that you have to ask yourself is, can they play a mistake-free game? Are they going to have that critical moment in the game where it's 4th and 2 or 4th and 3, and they have a false start or something like that? Because it's even noteworthy for LSU too. I mean, you know they haven't always played the cleanest football, especially on the offensive line. And if you're A&M, you're not we're really not gonna be able to afford having you know having a having a Wegman interception, or being able to have that attack where the rushing attack is kind of the way to kind of get this whole offense moving, and then you can complement it with Wegman being there, and also having your special teams as well being an essential part of this matchup too, because the one criticism I think is noteworthy is is Wegman definitely the guy with the better intangibles? Yeah, but at the same time, he ever since he came back from the injury, he's been wildly inconsistent. And I think if you're an A&M fan, I don't care how loud that Kyle Field is. I mean, he's gonna have to clean that up enough to the point where there's not a critical interception that cost them 7 points and ultimately becomes the reason why A&M is playing catch up ball instead of trying to let their defense win the game in those critical moments. But you know outside of that too, I mean, I think Texas A&M secondary is going to be a huge matchup for this game, because if Nussmeier is able to find some similar success, I mean, he's had Daniels be a fairly reliable target, and A&M, quite frankly, let Mississippi State hang in a little bit longer than you would like. And when you look at A&M's wins, I mean, you had the tune-up game versus McNeese, a really strong win versus Florida. You had a Bowling Green game and Arkansas where they kind of let them hang in for a little bit, and even the Mississippi State game, I would argue that they've been letting teams, letting teams hold, kind of stay in it long enough to the point where you do kind of have to question, you know, to what extent can A&M really, put their foot on the gas and make LSU and Nussmeier really start early too, because even if you think about the LSU Ole Miss game, LSU really didn't have much momentum until about the third quarter. So when you think about all these things considered, I think the Texas A&M secondary is going to be a big deal, and also getting this rushing attack going. And lastly, I think the thing I might want to add to, outside of the typical trench conversation that we always have, is how effective can Texas A&M continue to be on third down? I think what they've done an excellent job in getting those, just being in those situations where it's third and manageable, but also being able to use Amari Daniels, being able to use Le'Veon Moss, having Marcel, if you want, you can use Marcel Reed in certain packages, and also Connor Wegman is athletic enough to be able to rush and be able to do a quarterback blast here and there. I mean, ideally, you don't want to rush him too much again with all kind of the lingering injuries that he's had, but it definitely goes to show there's a number of reasons why you should be excited for this matchup. But if you're if you're an LSU fan, I mean, obviously you need Caden Durham to start early. Really have to rely on this LSU defensive line, who I might want to add, I heavily criticized at the beginning of the season, but now, you know I will say they've maximized this defensive line. I think this defensive staff also deserves a lot of credit, because I think many people, including myself, thought that defensive line was going to be a significant weakness going into the season. However, LSU has done enough to mask that, and if they can if they can get Wegman in some uncomfortable situations, I think that's another key point that LSU has out, aside from the rushing attack, and also finding ways to stretch the field and getting some pressure on Wegman. And lastly, if you're Texas A&M, my keys to the game are making sure you're having a mistake-free game to the point where Wegman's inconsistencies are masked as much as possible. You continue to win the third down battle, and really control the time of possession, get that rushing attack going, and bleed the clock as much as you can, and let that home crowd really be as big of an advantage as possible. And lastly, you know making sure that Nussmeier is not in a situation where he can get those explosive plays, finding those guys deep downfield, and you know make him second guess when he's going to be a little bit aggressive. Could I do anticipate Nussmeier trying to take some chances on Texas? And it's a game that I hope all you guys are going to be tuning into, because I know I definitely will be.